So my story begins 22 years ago when I first met my partner, Stephen. This is us at 30, and we are young and in love. Prior to this time, Stephen and I had had a very different history for ourselves. Prior to this time, I identified as someone who's a closeted bisexual. So let's break that down. I was bisexual. That means I was having sex with people of both genders. I was having relationships with people of both genders. And I was having sexual relationships with people of both genders. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm a huge geek. I've got a PhD in chemical engineering. I'm a big science fiction fan. So I wasn't actually having a lot of sex, and I wasn't having a lot of relationships. It turns out being able to speak Klingon is not a good way to pick up girls, right? And it's not a good way to pick up guys either. So I wasn't doing a lot of that, but I was having those relationships. But my heterosexual relationships were open, and my homosexual relationships were closeted. They were concealed. So before I could step into my identity as a gay man, I had to step back from my identity as a straight man. And part of that meant coming to terms with the fact that I would never marry and I would never raise children. Stephen had a very different history than mine. He never came out of the closet because he was never in the closet. He identified as a gay man from the age of 11, and he'd been living his life as an openly gay man up until this time. He's also a huge geek. He's got a biology degree. He's a big science fiction fan. And the two of us met at a gay science fiction convention, where it turns out you actually can pick up somebody if you're able to speak Klingon. During that time, it came to light that Stephen was very interested in the idea of raising children. And for me, as it turned out, I had never really given up the idea of possibly being a father. In discussing this idea of having children, we decided to look into it, and there was an information session that was run by Lambda Family Circle and the Pride Center, which is here in Albany. And what we learned is we virtually had no options. At the time, lesbians were having children by alternative insemination, but it was largely underground. And there was really no one who would deal open with you as a gay male couple to adopt. So we learned that we had no options, except there was one option. We could adopt a child through foster care. And not just any child, we could adopt a hard-to-place child. So Stephen and I went home that night, and something about that got us right here. Something about that really struck us, and we said, that's wrong. The idea that there are children who don't get to have families just because they're not perfect, just because they're not somebody's idea of perfect, that offends us. And we said, you know what? If perfect families don't have room for a child like this, we do. Because lots of people think that we're not perfect either. So one of the themes of my talk today, and the one thing I want you to take home if you take home nothing else, is this idea of overlapping identities. I wish that I could just come here and tell you that I'm just a gay father. I wish it was that simple, but it's not that simple. What I ended up with is multiple identities that intersected with each other. And here's one of the first of them. Being a foster or foster adoptive parent is a fundamentally different way of thinking about parenting. Right? Think about yourselves for a moment and what you expect for the future. Right? Maybe you hope to be a parent someday. Maybe you want to be child-free. Maybe you're not sure. But whenever you think about it, you probably think that it's just something that you can do. You don't think, all right, if I work really hard, I could earn my license, and then this is something I'll be able to do. So for foster and foster adoptive parents, parenting is not an inherent right. It's not just something that you have. It's an earned right. I had to earn the right to be a parent. I had to prove myself worthy of becoming a parent. And the interesting thing for me is that in many ways, my foster adoptive identity as a parent is much stronger than my gay identity. My gay identity is something that's fundamental to who I am. It's so fundamental that I trashed my entire life at the age of 30 and started over in order to be true to that. My foster parenting identity is something that I earned. I earned a license, the same way that you guys earned your driver's license. And yet, in many ways, that identity is much stronger. Would I trust my child to another parent just because they're a gay parent? Absolutely not. Would I trust them to another parent because they were a foster parent or foster adoptive parent? Absolutely. With my life and with my child's life. And the final thing that changed for us is that once we earned our license, we began our journey to find a child to join our family. Or as we say in our house, it was the year of fire. For us, Stephen and I were waiting for what's called a legal risk placement. So when children come into foster care, the idea is not to have them adopted. The primary goal of foster care is reunification with the birth family. We forged on a little more, and finally we met Darius. Darius entered the foster care system when he was 5 days old, and by the time he reached us, he was on his 5th or 6th caseworker. My son is obviously a hard-to-place child. for 3 reasons. And so what are the 2 obvious reasons?
African-American male.
Thank you. He's African-American and he's male. The 3rd reason is that Darius was developmentally delayed when he joined our family. And we were able to adopt Darius. And when we did, we won the gold ring. And we won the gold ring in 3 very important ways. Number 1, Stephen and I were the first gay male couple to successfully adopt through Albany County foster care. One couple had made the attempt before us, and lesbians had done it before us, but 2 men had never actually been able to adopt through the system before. We were the first. The second is that our adoption of Darius was a joint adoption. At this time, gay couples were not able to adopt jointly. Why can't you adopt jointly? Because the courts won't give custody of a child to an unmarried couple. But gay people can't get married. But you're an unmarried couple, but gay people can't get married. So what you had to do is you had to do 2 adoptions. So one person would adopt the child, and then the second person would adopt the child in turn. And each of those processes took about 2 years. The third thing is that we have a New York State adoption for Darius. What that means is that when you're adopted in New York State, the state rewrites your history. Darius's original birth records were sealed, even he can't get them, and he was issued a new birth certificate that states he was born to us as our son on his date of birth. As far as the law is considered, Darius was born to us as our child and has always been our child, and it's never been otherwise. If he wasn't so obviously not our biological child, he would actually never have to know. On adoption day, we pretty much won it all. And what do you do after that? You go to Disney World, right? I love this picture, right? It's a very happy picture, a very happy family time. But for me, I look at this picture and I see my family. But for a lot of other people, they look at this picture and what they see is a non-traditional family. And in particular, it's a non-traditional family in 2 very important ways. Number 1, we're obviously a gay family. We have a saying in our community, which is that children bring you out like nothing else before, right? I mean, I thought I was out. I was out to my family. I've been out at several different jobs. I'm out to my friends. I'm out to somebody, who asked me casually. But just walking down the street, particularly as a cisgendered person, nobody really knows I'm gay. When you're doing this at Disney World, everybody knows you're gay, right? When you're walking down the street and your son wants to hold both your hands, everybody knows you're gay. When Darius and I go to the YMCA and we're going to swim and we're in the locker room and Darius says, "Hey, Papa, what's Daddy making for dinner?" Everybody knows you're gay. So suddenly this part of my identity, which I thought was all sort of completely settled out, came to be present in a completely new way and really changed the way that I relate to people, because now, in some ways in that I've become somewhat more traditional in that I'm parenting a child, I've also become more non-traditional because now my gayness is really on display all the time. The other way in which our family is different is that our family is a transracial family. Right? So to make distinction in the terms, if you're talking between the 2 adults in the marriage or the 2 parents, racial differences are interracial. Between the parents and the children, that's transracial. I look at my son, and I remember that this is the child who couldn't even sit up, right? And look at him now. And I look at myself, and I remember that this is the man who thought he would never, ever be a father, who thought he'd just given that up forever. And look at me now. And I remember one more thing. These are my parents. After 9 years of silence, my parents and I met at a family funeral, and we began the process of reconciliation. 6 months later, they came to Albany and met their grandson for the first time. I wish I could tell you this was a perfect happy ending, but that doesn't always happen for people like me. Unfortunately, by this time, my mother had contracted ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a progressive neurological disorder which affects the entire body and causes a slow paralysis. ALS is incurable, untreatable, and fatal. It hit my mother in the throat first, so by the time she finally met her grandson, she was no longer able to speak to him. And she won't survive to see him reach middle school. Becoming a parent taught me many, many things. It taught me that for every one of us, there's one thing for which we would risk everything. One thing for which we just run out into traffic if we could change one thing about the world. It taught me that all the things I thought I understood, race, color, gender, orientation, the differences between straight people and gay people, I didn't understand at all. It taught me that some scars are worth it. But most of all, it taught me that there's always hope. There's hope for new beginnings, even for people like me.